Welcome back. Now, I said in a previous video that I would talk about a few of the subjects that were covered in a recent lecture that I attended because there was lots of really good information in that one. So I'm going to cover a couple of, probably not everything because honestly, I'm not even sure if I can remember everything they talked about. And there was actually, for me personally, relatively little new information. This is one of the topics, though, that actually did have a little bit of new information in it. And well, we're going to talk about movement, how badly horses need movement. It's extremely important. I've believed this for a long time, and this is why it's probably the first subject I'm going to cover, because I've always thought that the movement of horses was important for a number of reasons. Uh, it's good for their feet, overall physical health, critical to the digestive system, and it is also very important for their mental health as well. Horses that are allowed lots of movement rarely suffer from a lot of problems. I'm going to start off with the fact that I was a little surprised about because this is based on a group of study horses that were in I believe it was a 40-acre enclosure, and they were basically left, they were pretty much unhandled horses. They were semi-feral, we'll call them, other than the occasional human intervention in order to get some blood tests and things like that that they would like to do for the purposes of research. They were pretty much left alone to their own devices. And there was mares and stallions, and they created pretty much a fairly natural herd and social environment that basically is very similar to what wild horses would do. Now, I had always heard that wild horses would travel up to 20 miles a day. Well, apparently, even though a lot of people think that's a lot, that's actually low in the studies that they did. And they used several sources for the data, so I believe it was fairly accurate. They used a combination of pedometers and GPS tracking and even personal observation as well. And they actually had one, the record holder was one mare that had just foaled, I believe it was an hour prior, and it actually traveled 100 miles that day. Uh, there may have been some stallion activity that encouraged that, but still, pretty remarkable. It turns out that the average was much higher. I think the average was closer to 35 miles a day. And this was after literally years of research on this herd. And without the wide expanse of wild horses, they don't have hundreds of thousands of acres to roam on. These horses were confined to a pasture that I believe was 40 acres, is what they said it was, and they still averaged 35 miles a day. I thought that was rather remarkable. This is why I strongly endorse and encourage things like track systems. If you're not familiar with what that is, Google paddock paradise, and you'll come up with ways that require a little effort, but you can actually take a relatively small amount of land and encourage horse movement that will actually encourage them to move a significant number of miles per day on a fairly small piece of land. And on that note, the amount of land needed, over the years I have read things as much as 15 acres per horse. I'm not sure how they get that or how they would even figure that because, well, for one thing, you would never want one horse alone. They are herd animals. That's knowledge that not too many people would ever disagree with on, except those that have only got one horse because they want an excuse for what they're doing. They want to think it's okay. And that's the reason a lot of people will argue about a lot of things. And the whole subject of movement, although I think it's critical to horse health, physical and mental, a lot of people will argue it because, well, quite frankly, they want to feel good about the way they keep their horse. That's one of the main reasons that people will disagree with you on things. And in many cases, unfortunately, due to circumstances, there's not a lot you can do. A lot of places, because of the population density, there isn't lots of land available for horses to be pastured on. Lots of the boarding facilities, depending on where you live, they give them different names. Livery stables, agusments, I don't know. There's a bunch of different names for them. Places where you pay money to keep your horse. And in a lot of those cases, there really isn't a lot of land available. And so, unfortunately, the horses don't get the amount of movement they need. And you will, in fact, end up with a lot of health issues and behavioral issues because of that. I know nobody wants to hear the downside of things, but it's a fact. Horses were meant to move. They were designed to move. And movement is essential to their health. And that was another thing in the lecture where they actually, I knew that movement was critical to the digestive system, but they went a little further with it and said that movement while eating is even important to the digestive system. And that's why those horses, while grazing, would travel a ridiculous number of miles because they were constantly moving while they were eating. They'd, move 5 feet, take a bite, move another 10 feet, take a bite, so on, all day long. And for those that don't know, horses will eat 14 to 16 hours a day. They don't sleep a lot. They actually spent a vast majority of their day either eating or moving or both. That's why it's important. Long ago, I knew that movement was very good for hoof health because many people will confirm that with every step the horse takes, it actually will push blood up the leg and aid the circulation in the leg and the hoof, which increases hoof health. Some people will even go so far as to say that a horse has 5 hearts, one main one in the chest and one in each hoof, so that they actually have a total of 5. And studies have also shown that horses can actually, with additional movement and a few other things that I don't want to get into, but the flexation of the hoof and the extra circulation can actually increase the longevity of the horse as well because it puts less strain on the main heart. So they actually have better overall circulation. And like I said, digestive system, I've always known that works better with movement. I didn't realize that the extent that applies, that they actually need the movement while eating even. Also important. I have my own horses on pasture here. This particular location, unfortunately, there isn't, due to the terrain, the ground chemistry, there's not a great deal of forage out there for them in the summertime, but they do get out there and move around. There is actually a total of, I believe, about 70 acres here. So that's helpful. It's definitely beneficial to their health. And horses that are stall kept, their movement's limited. And I've always been against stall-kept horses. A lot of people will do it for a lot of reasons. In this particular location, we have, I do believe, 20, 21 stalls, something like that. At the moment, only 2 are in use. One because the horses have special dietary needs, and the other one because the horse just came out of surgery. The rest are all empty. And, aside from I use 4 for my 4 horses, but only for about 5-10 minutes, just while I'm giving them their supplements. After that, they're back out in the pasture with the rest of the horses. So movement, very important. Stall kept, lack of movement, totally unnatural for a horse. It affects their health in many ways, their hoof health. Horses that are stall kept, colic. You will very rarely ever find wild horses suffer from colic or any form of lameness. In the study where they have this herd in 40 acres, and the number varies. It started out as 13 mares, 13 stallions, has grown from there. I believe it was up to over 70. They try to keep it down. They actually sell off horses every year, but they like to keep it as natural as possible, so there's still field breeding stallions out there, so there's constant reproduction. And they have never, ever in, I can't remember how many years now. It's been quite a few years that they've been doing this study, that they've had this herd, something like 10 years or more. I think it's more than that, actually. But we'll say at least 10. And during the entire time that they've had this herd of semi-feral horses, they have not had a single case of lameness or colic. Not one. They also don't worm. They don't vaccinate. That's another subject we won't get into. But like I said, in the entire duration of the herd that they've got, because they've always been free to move, no lameness, no colic. Never. Not one case. And considering how many horses they've had go through there over the years, that's an awful lot of horses to have 0 incidents. So that's the importance of movement. It keeps them healthy, and it's very good for them mentally. Horses that are confined to stalls quite often will develop everything from chewing to cribbing, also known as wind sucking. Some people think that's 2 different things. It's not. And cribbing was actually another topic they talked about too, but we won't get into that right now. Weaving, they can get aggressive. All kinds of behavioral problems can develop from lack of movement, from being kept in stalls. And like I said, these horses, all out on a pasture, as natural as possible and still being able to handle them enough to do their studies. Not one instance of lameness, not one instance of colic, and average daily movement up to 35 miles. So is movement important for horses? Absolutely. I've always believed so. Now I believe even more so. So that was one of the subjects I talked about. Thought I'd share that one with you. It's one of my favorites. Anytime you mess with nature, there's always repercussions. Have a good day.